And without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Dean of the Maxwell School, David Van Slyke.
Thanks, Joan. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much. Thank you, Joan, and good evening. I'm David Van Slyke. I have the privilege of serving as Dean of the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. I'm also a professor of public administration and international affairs. Before we proceed, just a couple of quick announcements. So if turn off your phones, your watch alarms, your tablets, anything else that beeps, talks, whispers, or makes a noise, that will distract from the discussion. I also want to let you know that this event is being live streamed. I'm so thrilled that the Maxwell School has returned to the Bay Area and partnered with Syracuse University's West Coast office. Joan, thank you so much for all your work on this. So this year, the Maxwell School is turning 100. And, you know, it's pretty amazing when you think about, in 1924, George Holmes Maxwell, who was an 1888 Syracuse University graduate, funded the establishment of a School of American Citizenship, essentially to prepare citizens for the leadership roles that would be needed in strengthening communities and creating opportunities for all. Today, Maxwell continues to educate and empower our community of faculty, staff, students, alumni, and friends for the greater good through teaching and study at the undergraduate level, in graduate programs, research activities in one of our 15 different interdisciplinary research centers and institutes, and in convening discussions like this one that we're going to have this evening. We'll explore the wide-reaching impact of and intersection between artificial intelligence, democracy, and citizenship, and how that affects all fields, including technology. Maxwell's DNA is encapsulated in the Athenian Oath, inscribed on the wall outside the Maxwell Auditorium, which calls for us to ever strive to leave what we find greater, better, and more beautiful than we found it. You know, whether you're a Maxwell graduate or you took a course in the Maxwell School as an undergraduate as part of the liberal arts requirements, I hope you feel a sense of connectedness to the university as we celebrate our centennial and think about the kind of historic and ongoing commitment to leave our world a better place for all. So now on to the topic of the evening. Hosting a panel on AI, we'll be featuring experts in fields of economics, law, private equity, and venture capital, as well as nonprofit fundraising. And this is a pretty exciting and transformative opportunity. The multidisciplinary approach we're going to take here is very quintessential of the Maxwell School, and it's going to allow us to explore AI's impact across various sectors by hopefully fostering a rich dialogue that goes beyond technical discussions. Economists can often provide insights into AI's potential to drive economic growth and efficiency. Legal experts often talk about how to think about the ethical and regulatory challenges that accompany technological advancements. And nonprofit fundraising professionals also highlight how AI can revolutionize strategies for engaging donors and maximizing impact. By bringing together these diverse voices and perspectives, we hope that you're going to find this to be an enriching conversation and one that paves the way for thinking about innovative solutions and collaborations in which AI can be harnessed for societal benefit. So that's part of what we're going to talk about tonight. There are not just underlying questions about a technology and the ecosystem in which other technologies develop, but also really the more human elements of the values that get promoted and diminished. We're going to talk about questions of our own humanity and the control we have over it, broader policy questions, how approaches are developed and socialized, and how adaptations are reported, formalized, evaluated, and perhaps ultimately reformed in organizations across all sectors, as well as by government agencies. Tonight, we're going to have a conversation with a few questions for our panelists, and then I'm going to incorporate your questions that you left on the index cards outside. If you're in the back and you're feeling pressed tightly. There's lots of seats up front, and you know how professors feel about students sitting in the far back, testing our eyesight. And seriously, we're going to have a fun, wide-ranging discussion. I think, you know, AI is a topic that is every day is in the news, of any kind of news, including the disinformation kind. But it also profoundly affects how we live, how we work, how we interact, and it influences everything, from employment and privacy to social dynamics and policy. So I think discussions like this are crucial because I think what it does is it helps us to gain insights into the development and implications of ethical and responsible AI frameworks, and hopefully that will help inform decision-making and future-looking strategies. Okay, so for this evening's conversation, we have three fantastic panelists. And just to be clear, I am giving a very tiny introduction on each of them. Otherwise, we would use up the hour just reading their bios. First is Mary Daly. Mary is the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco and a 2024 voting member of the Federal Open Market Committee, which if you read today's journal, there were at least 2 stories about the FOMC today and 2 of Mary's colleagues. She's known for her extensive research on labor economics and commitment to community engagement, and President Daly received her PhD in economics from Maxwell and SU in 1994 and received an honorary doctorate, because really one is not enough, in 2019. Raj-Ann Rekhi Gill is the operating partner for Silicon Valley Quad. It's an angel investing syndicate, and it has a rich background in nonprofit fundraising and program development, and Raj-Ann serves on several prestigious boards. She received her undergraduate degree in international relations from Maxwell and magazine journalism from the Newhouse School, and her master's in international economics and relations from the London School of Economics. And she is a current trustee of the Board of Trustees for Syracuse University. And finally, Judge Jamie Baker, who's director of the Syracuse University Institute for Security Policy and Law, a professor at both the Syracuse College of Law and the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, and a judge on the Data Protection Review Court. And with that, I'd ask our panelists to please come up, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
Ooh, that's bright light.
Yes.
So Mary, I'm going to start with you. Maybe you can give us a sense from your perspective how you define artificial intelligence.
That's a great question, and it's actually one that I think is the right starting point, because artificial intelligence, AI, many people think of it as when ChatGPT launched its model in November 2022 when we could all get access to it. That's what they think of. But in fact, it's far longer history than that and includes many more things than that. If you look at a timeline of AI, it starts all the way back in the 1950s when people were thinking about how can we do pattern recognition and prediction. And so it includes machine learning and robotic process automation and textual analysis, and all the way up to the thing that we have on our phones oftentimes if we have a large language model that generates ideas that summarize documents. And the way I think of it then, and we thought a lot about this because we have an emerging tech economic research network we started at the San Francisco Fed, and we're like, what is going to be in this network? And it really is any technology that's going through these text and other things, making our lives easier, but doing it in a way that generates answers that we would otherwise have to go through treasure troves of information to find ourselves. So big, vast area with a lot of interesting things to study.
That's great. Thanks, Mary, so much. Jamie, what about you? How do you define artificial intelligence?
Well, that's a pretty good definition. I will concur in the opinion of my colleague. And then I will say, when I got into the field, as I was telling Pavan, I was tricked into doing that, but that's a story for a different day. I said, well, let's start with a definition of AI, and I came upon 7,497, none of which made any sense to me. The one I've settled on, which I think is the most accessible one, is one that the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence has offered. And their definition is AI is a constellation of technologies that enable computing machines to perform tasks and solve problems that would otherwise require human intelligence. Let's extract a couple of key points. Like Mary indicated, it's not one thing, it's a constellation of technologies. It's algorithms, it's data, it's sensors. And so we have to avoid saying, this is how we respond to AI. No, we respond to this application. So that's point one. Point two, enabling machines to perform tasks and solve problems that would otherwise require human intelligence. People like to anthropomorphize AI, partly because of the robotics, but partly because of neural networks and our effort to try and create AI modeled on the human brain. They lose sight of the fact that it's not human intelligence. We're not trying to create human intelligence. It's to perform tasks and solve problems that would otherwise require human intelligence. But it's doing it in different ways. And this opens up, and I'm going to stop, this opens up the door to a number of problems and a number of opportunities.
Great, that's super. Raj-Ann, maybe you can tell us a little bit, I mean, based on your work, what do you see as the most exciting development or topic in AI as it relates to some of the work that you've been doing?
Oh, wow, that's a pretty profound question. I mean, what I see is, I'll just say from the outset that I'm largely optimistic that AI is going to improve humanity's and people's quality of life. I mean, of course, there are some pitfalls and some dark things that we have to navigate, but I think overall this is a fantastic thing for humanity. Generative AI, I think there's a lot of fear that it's going to replace people, it's going to make people obsolete. I actually think the opposite. It's going to make us more productive. It's going to open up complete new ways of doing things. So I'm an optimist. I think that it's changing all the time. Like when Llama came out with its third version, it was like kind of good, and then like the next one was like such a leapfrog. So it's evolving so quickly that I can't pinpoint any one thing, but it's just, even from like month to month, the types of ideas that I'm presented with by potential entrepreneurs, they're just mind-blowing how they're able to embrace the technology as it's evolving all the time, and it's improving all the time. It's intelligent because it's learning and it's synthesizing. That's the intelligence.
Thanks so much, Raj-Ann. Mary, what about you? What do you see as an exciting development or topic associated with AI?
So one of the things I really get excited about, because I'm a labor economist by training, and I think a lot about the distribution of opportunities across the nation and the world, and I think of AI as potentially being a great leveler, leveling the playing field, democratizing the expertise by giving people a hand up or a leg up in terms of starting. So let me give you one or just a couple of examples. They'll be quick though. Think of younger people early in career. You come in, you're early in career, you've been trained, you have a tremendous number of skills that you learned at the university, getting your degree, but you lack the experience of that specific firm. You don't know everything they've already done. If you're an engineer, you come in and you're asked to design something, but you don't know the 20 years of designs they've already made. But with generative AI, you have a model, you feed that information in, it can give you a starting point. And so you suddenly are much better at able to make a productive start on something, because you actually have the experience coming through and saying, here's the best thing we can give you based on the experience the firm's already had. You add your skills to it, you're there. So think of the leveling of the playing field for people who don't have access to all the things that would be early in career or other places. Another place where you can see leveling the playing field is in business. So small businesses, if you keep track of the way small businesses work, they often don't have all the access to project planning, grant planning, how to access capital, how to present themselves in a world where they're competing for business. But generative AI products, they can type in their business model, get out a project plan, get a guide to how to do things, and suddenly, even how to write a contract, and suddenly they're able to access a marketplace that they had subsequently or previously not been able to access. So with is done correctly, I'm also an optimist, it has great power. But ultimately, as I think is really important to emphasize, technology doesn't make decisions. People do. So if we get 10 years from now and we're not happy with how it turned out, we can't blame the technology. It really would be our responsibility to determine a different future.
All right, thanks so much. Jamie, maybe you can help us understand, are there particular issues around AI systems that you're most concerned about? And if you can sort of pull on that thread a bit and tell us why, that would be great.
Is this a 7-hour event?
About 70 seconds.
Okay. So the person who pulled me into the world of AI, Jason Matheny, who's now the president of RAND, was previously the director of the Intelligence Advanced Research Project activity. He's been called an apocalyptimist. And my colleagues, this is the happiest I've ever been during an AI discussion.
And we could tell by your facial expression.
Because I'm a national security guy. And so I think about all the bad things that can happen and try and protect the United States from bad things. And so so I completely agree. And there's 3 camps out there. I call them the end of the world camp, which is James Barat, who wrote the book Our Last Invention. So that's pretty gloomy. Stephen Hawking is in the fork in the road camp, which is AI, powerful AI, may be the greatest thing to ever happen to humanity or the worst. That's up to us. As Mary indicated, this is all about human choice, and so far we're not making a lot of choices, at least in my field. And then the third camp is stay calm and carry on, everything's fine. And that's one that you might hear more often in this part of the world, especially in places called Valley. And here are 3 common themes of concern. So I don't care which camp you're in, and I'm not worried about the superintelligence camp, that's the paperclip optimizer, and it's going to come and eat us. I don't worry about that because we're going to do ourselves in before then. And if we don't make good choices now, but here are the 3 issues that will come up with all AI. And I'm going to emphasize the issues, not the positives, because the positives are there. One is what I call the centaur's dilemma. AI is all about human-machine teaming, and DoD uses a model called the Centaur model of AI, part human, part machine. And every AI choice has to be, how do you design that teaming? And the Centaur's dilemma in national security land is the more you allow the AI to act autonomously, which you might or must do if you're doing cyber stuff, for example, the less human control you have at that point. The more human control you exercise, the less you have the advantage of the autonomous ability of the AI to do something. So that's a dilemma, and you have to choose how are we going to balance that, or what choices are we going to make. And I'm almost done. The next 2 are bias. So lawyers, when we think about bias, we think about suspect classes, equal protection, things like that. With AI, we need to recognize that bias is not just that type of bias, human-type bias, things like that, but all the bias that comes from old data, stale data, poor data, inapt data, and things that happen like that. These things can be mitigated and managed, but you need to know to look for them. And then the third category is data. Right now, AI depends on data. Large language models, if it's not bolted down, it's being scraped right now. If your phone's on, it's being scraped right now. And it's not just China that's doing it, it's big tech and big AI and everybody else. And there we have all sorts of issues like who owns it? What red line should we put down? Should we allow this type of scraping or that type of scraping? And we know these questions. Time now to answer them.
Jamie, thanks so much for that. Raj-Ann, I don't think anyone's going to accuse you of being an an apocalyptimist. That's a hard one to say fast.
Apocalyptimist.
But are there issues that you're concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, I was just remembering, a few months ago, I called Charles Schwab Bank, where I have some accounts, and they have this nifty, very convenient feature saying, you just say, my voice is my password. And I thought, this is probably not a very good thing, because, the ability to replicate a voice, deepfake videos, I think the ability to destabilize our perception of what's real, what we can trust, is very concerning. You're already seeing evidence of, I was reading an article about somebody who received a panic call from their child that they were in jail and you needed to send this money. And the wife called the husband, and right before she wired the money, he's like, call the police department where he's supposedly being held and confirm he's there. Of course, he wasn't there. They had replicated his voice. And I was like, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I think there's a lot of concern around its ability to cloud our perception of what we can trust. And it'll be interesting seeing, leading into the election, what deepfake videos might surface around some of the people running for office. So that's probably primarily. There's a lot of concern, of course, around cybersecurity and data intrusion, and also data leakage. The hapless Samsung employee who inadvertently leaked all their data, right, using ChatGPT, and just people's embracing these products without fully understanding the underlying technology, what they're exposing.
Thanks so much. Mary, when you think about AI, what do you think about in terms of implications on the labor market and economic inequality? Those are two issues that you think a lot about. What's the implications of AI on that?
Would you mind if I take a little privilege to just follow up on the data point?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, Jimmy, you made a really great point that they're getting a lot of data, but I think it's useful for us all to recognize, we all do, I think, is that more data is not better data.
Right.
And getting a lot of data isn't going to solve the problem of having incomplete good data, which we need to base. And the models are only as good as the data that come in. If the data coming in are not good, the models will give us answers. They'll have fast answers, but they won't have good answers. And I think that's a risk that is important and kind of speaks to all of the things that you've heard from the other panelists. So, okay, back to the labor market, and it was just too important a point to let pass.
No, and I'm glad you did follow up on that, because right now we're seeing, like, just in terms of labor market, job ads for people who can write prompts, but really around that kind of reinforced human learning feedback element about the data that you're talking about, that really then gets at issues of context and how to think about something.
Absolutely, right? And the best people doing prompt engineering or model testing are people who understand that sometimes the data are just poor, and that's why the model gives you a false answer, hallucinates, or whatever it's doing. It just doesn't have the right information. You can train it only so much on poor information. So those are important things that I think we're currently working on. Now, when I think of the labor market and inequality, it really is, I have a different set of names, but it's the same characterization. You go from the dystopian to the utopian. And then somewhere in the middle is likely where the truth is. There is no technology in the history of technologies in the world that has ever reduced employment on net. But the gap between when you replace certain tasks in some people's jobs and when you augment jobs to make people better, and when you create new jobs from the technology, can actually be very long duration of time. The other thing is it often can be very different people. So you take one kind of job and you give it to a different person or augment another kind of job. Computers are the great example of this, that there was a lot of hope that computers and the internet would democratize information, and that democratization of information would reduce inequality, make everyone better off, make the labor market more equal, et cetera. And that just didn't happen. What happened instead was computers were matched with people who already had high skills, and they got even higher rates of return on their schooling. And then it didn't really effect, people who did things mostly with their hands and didn't have any interaction, so they still kept their rate of return. And then it hollowed out that middle because those were easily replaced. So a big fear, I think, that many have is that the same thing's going to happen with generative AI. It's going to take jobs, it's going to leave a group of people completely behind. But I think we are at a fork in the road moment where we can choose on this front. Because on one hand, you could imagine that this goes the way of computers, and we do exactly that. On the other hand, and this is the hand I'm leaning towards, and David Autor, another economist at MIT, he has a similar view, and in corresponding with him, it's like it could happen, but we'll have to work for it to happen. But the other part of the fork is you could level the playing field. You could democratize skills and expertise. So if I may, I'll take 30 seconds to give an example. Think of the medical profession. So here on the West Coast, if I go to my network of doctors, they have medical assistants, and at this point you have to sign a release that says you're willing, and they use generative AI. So you can go in, say that you're first being seen, the doctor has a long wait to be seen. You go in, you have an MRI, an X-ray or something, they can push it through a generative AI product, millions and millions of data points in there, and they can give a set of possibilities. This is it, this is it, this is it. So I was looking at this script that medical assistant now has, she let me, and it's like, if the patient has this and this, then it's probably this. If the patient has this and this, then it's probably that. But you have to talk to the patient. So what happened is the medical assistant is able to be much more productive. But what is important? I have to allow it to happen. So that means consumers have to be okay with it. And we as a society have to ensure that our regulatory and other licensing requirements allow it to occur. And of course, back to the data, we have to make sure that the data doesn't give us false answers because the risks are too high. So you put all of this together, and I'm an evidence-based optimist, so I'm neither sitting on the side of the utopians or the dystopians, but I do think at this fork in the road, there's some real interrogations we can do to see how can we lift and how can we level the playing field. And that would be inequality reducing. And we could really use some inequality reducing access.
That's great. Thank you so much. Raj-Ann, how are you seeing startups leverage AI to actually disrupt traditional industries and create new business models?
Yeah, I mean, the last 9 months, almost every single pitch has had some iteration of how AI is going to transform XYZ industry. This morning it was in the medical field. Yesterday it was, now everyone can use a generative AI to perfect their resume, right? Match this job description with my, resume and make it, the one that they want to hire. Well, everyone's doing that, and HR people are overwhelmed with these kind of, monotonous resumes that don't really say a lot. And so this product, this pitch I heard yesterday was about developing a way to really assess skills before you bring them in for an interview, and kind of calling that in a kind of very egalitarian way. Like, you say you have the skill set, prove it. Here's a, simulation. And it was fascinating because I've heard that from a few different people now, that HR officers are just sitting on mountains of paperwork. Especially even in government agencies, they don't know how to process, or RFPs even, right? There's a lot of glut of these documents, and there's no way to really assess their variability. The medical field, we hear a lot of ideas around optimizing the billing, even, reaching out to patients. A nurse traditionally would make a preoperative call to tell you how to prepare for XYZ procedure. Well, that could be done with a robocall that's not like the stilted bank kind of, phone tree that we all hate, but like a real conversational style that, has a name. And so it runs the gamut. I have another portfolio company that we did invest in that is trying to help equity researchers, so people who work in hedge funds or investment banks who have to go through all these company disclosures, and it's hundreds of pages of very monotonous documents, but you have to slog through it because you're trying to find that kernel of information, that contradiction between last quarter and this quarter's report that can help you formulate your investment thesis. So we have a company that's doing that. The Samsung example, so a lot of enterprises have pulled back from their employees being allowed to use these generative AI tools because there's a fear now of information getting out. And so there's a lot of people in that space trying to, you don't want to limit your options, right? There's not just ChatGPT, there's Llama, there's so many different options. So there's now tools to help people navigate these platforms, but in a redacted way, keeping information confidential. So I mean, I've seen any kind of space, there's someone in there trying to use generative AI to improve and optimize how things are done.
So I can't help but think about the HR companies.
Yeah.
Well, do they either have a group of candidates who are all vacuous, or do they have a group of candidates who are all unicorns, right? And so do you need AI to actually create a simulation to test the validity and veracity of the resume statements? Jamie, thank you so much, Raj-Ann. Jamie, what's the most important achievement in AI this past year from your perspective, and how's it being applied?
Oh, boy. We did not get the questions ahead of time, just for the record.
Wanted this to be dynamic for you and not think that their avatars were sitting here.
So I think the most important, you're going to think I'm going to say something tech-wise. And I would not say this is an achievement, but we take our progress where we can get it. Law always trails technology. Case law is never moving as fast as Moore's law. But it's really the case with AI. AI moves at exponential paces, and the law moves very slowly. And to me, the accomplishment is that finally we've moved on to actually trying regulation in a few areas. I identify 5 steps in the regulatory process. This is just trying to create a structure so we can try and figure out what's going on. One is the realization stage. Oh, AI, we better do something. The second stage is principles. So when the government in the 2017, 18, 19 timeframe, led by the national security side, realized they ought to govern the AI they were using and not just use it, they came up with principles. But principles are no good. That's by themselves. Due process, well, that's great. That doesn't solve anything. It's how you apply that in context. So that's the next stage, putting principles into practice with respect to specific AI applications. The next stage is legislation or regulation, and then the final stage is international adoption and adaption. So what we've seen in the past year, finally, is an effort on the regulatory side to do something. We have the EU Act, and of course, anytime you say EU, you immediately run for the doors. But at least there's something out there to react to. And the EU Act is the European Union's effort to try and identify different types of AI, ranging from high-risk AI to low-risk AI. And if it's high risk, you have to do certain things. If it's low risk, you don't. They may have it right, they may have it wrong, but now we can react and try and figure out whether we're doing the right thing. That's a real achievement. And then on October 30th of the past year, we had for the first time an effort to try and get our hands around AI regulation in the United States with the President's executive order. It's one of these, I'm sure, how many of you read it? I see you've all read it, yeah. It's good reading.
The narcoleptics will want the reference when they're done.
It's, most executive orders are somewhat lengthy. This one is a tome. It's depending on how you print it off and what font you're using, it's about 80 to 90 pages. And there are 90 action items in it, 90 plus or minus. Some of them are things like, somebody go off and figure this out and come back and write a memo. So that's not particularly useful, but at least it's identified a problem. And then a lot of them are quite specific. One of them, for example, identifies how you can use the Defense Production Act to figure out who might be using a large language model to do bad things like create biological agents. That's real, it's good, and we're finally getting off the mark. So the accomplishment is to start to move to the fourth stage, where we're trying to figure out in the national security space and elsewhere, how do we get our hands around this? How do we regulate it? One more example, in the legal area, one of the debates is over whether, and if so, when judges should use predictive algorithms to predict parole risk, bail risk, predict the need for substance abuse counseling. So it's not all bad, right? And then, of course, the prediction of recidivism, future behavior. Well, that's peculiar and awkward. So the executive order has a whole section requiring deep study of those issues in the criminal justice system. And this is an area where all sorts of bias can come into the algorithm and the AI that's being used. I happen to be of the view, and I'm not, I'm more in this camp, and my colleagues are more in that camp that I work with in the law profession, that judges, this is a Centaur's dilemma issue. Judges should use all the tools available to them to make wise and just decisions, but in the end, the human should make the decision and be accountable for it and do it in a transparent way. So I don't mind if a judge wants to look at AI output. I do mind if the judge defers to the AI output or over relies on it because it's scientific and it's data-based. But again, I'll probably leave it there because there's no end to where we can go with this.
Thank you very much. Mary, that's a good segue to the question I have for you. I mean, when you think about AI and how it's, from your perspective, how is it transforming economic research and how's it changing the profession? And Jamie referenced the predictive elements. We had Professor Mulanathan on campus just a few months ago, and he did his own presentation on behavioral economics around the predictive nature and actually the improved validity of the predictive nature of AI over judges, especially when it came to low-level criminal court decisions and the impacts on recidivism. I think that was interesting for a lot of people there, and it gets to the issue of highly routinized cases and where there's actually more space for variability when you'd think there would be more certainty. How's the economic profession being impacted and research itself?
Sure, so I think there's several ways that economic research and probably research in general is being impacted. And one way is just the generation of new ideas. And I'll come back to the testing other things, but the generation of ideas. So the way, if you're a researcher, you generate ideas for yourself is not many people go back in their rooms and just think hard and then out comes an idea. They usually read the literature, understand the literature, and then think about where the next piece of the literature needs to go or where are we missing. Well, there are millions of articles and things published across the globe in all kinds of topics, and generative AI helps by saying, how can I summarize where we are and what needs to be done? And so it just allows you to narrow the focus and generate ideas. And I don't think it takes away the creativity, but it does show you the gaps, and it shows you where others have already done things. So that's an early starting point. People have been doing this for a while, just using this sort of mentality and ability. Another thing that I think has changed the profession is it's being able to use qualitative analysis and quantify it. So think of large groups of text. If you're using large groups of text, now you can use textual analysis and you can generate summaries of what that says. And that machine learning and textual analysis has been around a long time, but it allows you to think about, oh, can you write a summary of that now and tell me what that's saying in a way that's very helpful. It's also helped with coding. Everybody can code their models quicker and faster, which gives them more time to think. So now let's go to what are the applications. So that's all about how researchers do their work. Let's think more about the applications they might use this for. And so the judges is a really interesting, or decisions is a really interesting example. There are lots of examples. My early work, when I was just starting out, was talking about, in economics, one early paper I read was, how doctors in different parts of the country and the very vintage of how they were trained just prescribed statins or did surgery depending on where they were trained and where they lived. And that was about the network of things you knew. So it is not surprising that models might have better predictive power than an individual judge or an individual doctor who's only seen the things that they've seen. That doesn't surprise me. But that is, and I'm going to go back to something Jamie said, but that's not the same as saying that we should defer to that. Because you might have someone walk into your courtroom or your office and the model or the average or what's normally done doesn't speak to the person you're in front of, who's in front of you. So I think it's interesting to think about where we can get better and then how we can use that better as an input, but not as the final decision. And so in economics, the same is true. We have a mantra in the bank, and it, depending on where you, in our innovation office, depending on what you like to read, you either know this originally comes from Spider-Man or Voltaire. You can pick, but it's with great power comes great responsibility. And again, you can pick on where you want the origin to be. Both are true, depending on where you first learned it. But it is the case that in economics, we just had a panel on this in our network on what does it do in economics. And to a person, all of our panelists said the real thing that economists have to know is just because it comes out of the model doesn't make it right. And we have to interrogate all the answers as much as we interrogate the inputs.
That's great. Raj-Ann, you work with a lot of startups, and you were just starting to tell us a little bit about some of the pitches that you're hearing in terms of some of your own investment decisions. How do you see AI as potentially increasing the productivity of these startups? Because both you and Mary early on in this conversation used a phrase of leveling the playing field for lots of different organizations. Mary, you said where at times there was an obstacle to access to capital. So Raj-Ann, help us understand a little bit from your perspective, how are startups potentially leveraging AI to increase productivity?
Yeah, I think both my co-panelists touched on the central tenet that I think we should not lose sight of is that humans are always going to be part of the curation of the final decision. It's not like it's going to come out with, the perfect answer and you're just going to go with that. You have to use it as an input and then use your human intelligence to do the final kind of decision. And I think a lot of startups recognize that. It's more about, helping the human in the role be more effective, more productive, to get to that answer quicker. She touched on, the literature that's out there and all sorts of, economic research, medical research, pharmaceutical research, the process now of going through that, even accessing, connecting all the dots, it's not possible to do it in an expedient way, but with AI, we could, develop, the new strain of antibiotics that much quicker. There's a lot of problems out there that people are, kind of muddling towards that startups are all trying to find that, sliver of the problem, but I don't think it's about replacing humans and having us just be the, taking our universal basic income and not working. I think everyone wants to be productive, I know, right? And so, yeah, it's more about improving processes. I mean, some of it, one of our portfolio companies is trying to disrupt manufacturing. I mean, I think about the Syracuse region about to go through a huge economic change with the Micron investment. There's going to be a ton of supply companies that pop up in that region. It's going to really improve the economy, I hope, of Central New York. And there's, all sorts of opportunity to improve these manufacturing processes, design. This entrepreneur was saying, to change one widget in a larger machine takes years of development. I mean, just like a simple 4-inch component because of all the design and engineering involved. And so he's trying to disrupt that by, having AI do, let's say, 95% of the grunt work, and then the human comes in and says, oh, these are the 3 options it's predicting. Let me refine these to the perfect end result. So it runs the gamut. It's really actually an exciting time. I have to say, 3 or 4 years ago, everyone was talking about, crypto and Web3, and I was like, I don't really get it. I'm not really sure I'm excited about this. But AI I can see that it's really going to improve almost everything that touches us.
Thank you so much. Jamie, help us understand how AI is being used in cybersecurity, and how is it evolving to address new threats?
Well, hard to say where to go with this.
Maybe you give us the unclassified version.
Yeah, well, thank you for that hint. This is being live streamed, right?
So
no.
extra care.
Well, it's helpful here that my ignorance prevents me from saying anything too dramatic. But we know that the Russians use disinformation to great effect, and AI is a great enabler. That's a short-term negative that AI presents, which is the ability to create, generate through generative AI and other tools, and through modeling to find the right person to target or the right group of people to target. And so you can use AI in response. And this is one where the centaur's dilemma is very keen, because in the cyberspace, you have to respond instantaneously. It doesn't do any good to get the code, the attack come in, have a principals meeting, take 6 weeks to discuss it, and then respond, which is sort of the government's normal model. And with cybersecurity, it's instantaneous, but DoD has the concept of active defense and forward defense and persistent engagement. So one of the issues here, and this is all available in a summary of an unclassified summary of a document, if you're going to do something other than block and do active defense or forward defense, that means it's going to happen instantaneously. You better be sure that you have correct attribution, which is one of the issues, because obviously there's a game of spy versus spy and cloaking. And it also means something that we've all touched on, which is you have to decide where the human control will occur. It's not going to occur at the moment of attack. It's too late then. So what it has to do is occur at the moment of design, the moment of testing, the moment of development. And it means that people like me who are lawyers have to get out of our old-fashioned practice and go to the place where the thing's being developed, so that we can assert values and assert principles about targeting, for example, before they're already embedded and baked into the algorithm and the scheme. So it's a fascinating problem, and like most things, you have AI as enabler of offense and enabler of defense. And depending on how you look at that, that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on which side of the table you're on. Great. Is that okay?
That's great, thank you.
Is that okay?
And for our live stream audience, Raj-Ann, we've talked a little bit about these elements of human control. This has come up repeatedly. I want to sort of frame a different question for you as a trustee. You're one of a small group of leaders leading the university as a volunteer. But unlike other volunteers, you spend a lot of time focused on the university. What role should universities like Syracuse play in educating today's students with AI? Because I think we've heard about kind of coding, about data, but we've also heard about first principles, about frameworks, about how to think about decision making. What do you think from where you sit, both on kind of your professional industry hat, but then also your volunteer trustee hat, that we should be doing differently?
Yeah, I went to Syracuse in the mid-90s when the World Wide Web was in its kind of, early childhood. Mosaic and Netscape were kind of coming online while I was at Syracuse. And so professors were very quick to say, no, just because you find it on the web doesn't mean that this is something that you can cite in a academic paper, or if you do, you have to, have other citations to kind of, support the overall argument. And I think we're at a similar kind of inflection point now where, I think, there's been cliff notes, there's been, ways to kind of cheat the system and kind of skip ahead and, not really do the grunt work. That's always kind of been there. I think universities still have a really important role to play around just how to synthesize critical thinking. I mean, just how to, receive the inputs, but still have the larger decision-making kind of framework, and not just, and building that kind of moral compass of not always taking the easier path, that there is, something about acquiring knowledge that's not just, cheating yourself. So kind of creating, just a love of learning, and also I think interacting with, in the classroom and having synchronous conversations with people still matters. I mean, I know there's all these massive online courses, which, does increase access for a lot of people, but I guess I'm kind of old school that way. I think there's something really special about the critical thinking that comes out of, being in a university environment.
Thank you very much. Jamie, you used at the beginning, to the very first question, you used a kind of a juxtaposition. You said legal and ethical. And I want to ask you kind of, how can educational institutions actually foster an ethical culture with respect to AI research among students?
Well, the question ties in together. Yeah, and if you pardon me for a second, this is a great opportunity for me to talk to a trustee and try and get things organized.
I'll take my notes.
I'm a big believer in teaching to the 21st century and the needs of the 21st century. The reason I went into the AI field is not because I'm particularly tech savvy. I have children for the sole purpose of turning my phone on and off. And as I said to Jason Matheny when he conned me into writing my first book on AI, I can't even spell AI. But teaching to the 21st century requires us as professors in the university as an institution to change the curriculum. And law schools are particularly old-fashioned and traditional. They teach to the last century, the turn of the last century, by which I mean that from 1899 to 1900. That is actually the curriculum that's still taught. That's nuts. And we're going to lose the 21st century if we don't teach the next generation what they need to know. That's why I learned AI, because that was the first thing on my list of what this generation and the next one needs to know for the 21st century. They have to have the confidence to say, I can participate in this discussion. I don't need to be a coder. I need to be savvy enough about the technology to get into the room and bring my legal expertise, my policy expertise, my technical expertise. One of the key ingredients is the ethical piece. So when I came to Syracuse, one of the reasons I came is, or frankly, the only reason I came, is because it was a university that had a leading public policy school and a law school. MIT doesn't have a law school. And in my field of national security, all issues are policy and law and policy. They're not just policy, they're not just law, and they're not just technology. And so to solve these problems, you have to bring together all the disciplines, which is something Syracuse can do and a lot of universities cannot. Not because they're bad universities, but like MIT, they don't come with a law school. They have a relatively small but very good policy school and so on, and then they're MIT. So what did I add to the curriculum? Space law and policy. All the action is up there, and it's going to become more so, and we're going to see AI join the club. And so space law and policy, emerging technology, and he wouldn't let me talk about the other two, quantum computing and synthetic biology and genetic engineering, because then we get really into the scary stuff. I like the optimistic part of this. So what else? Ethics. So I added a course on national security ethics. I'm like, why don't you teach ethics at a law school? So here's the catch. These are all optional courses.
Yeah.
How can you be in the 21st century and have those be the optional course? What I really want to give the students is not knowledge about a particular AI application. That's going to be dated next week. I want to give them the confidence to ask the questions for the technology or the application they're going to wrestle with in 2 years, 7 years, or 9 years. And my problem is, the first question, is it on the bar exam? Well, you got to be kidding me. Of course it's not. But it's on the exam of life, right? If you want to be successful, you need to know this stuff. So the universities, this is not picking on Syracuse, universities have to figure out, what do we really need our students to know? We need them to know liberal arts, because leadership is a liberal art, and values are a liberal art, and emotional intelligence is a liberal art. And we need them to have the confidence to deal with these transformative, in some cases, disruptive technologies. I'd much rather have that than someone who knows contract law. I can get generative AI to teach me contract law. By the way, generative AI can pass the bar exam, so we'll just farm out the bar exam to generative AI, and then now let's teach the 21st century. So I think I've had my say, but I'd loved your response. Thank you for agreeing that we're going to transform at the Board of Trustees level the whole curriculum.
And you have it documented on live streams. Mary, thank you, Jamie, very much. How do you see AI potentially benefiting the public good? And where do you see some places where it's not quite reaching that potential?
Sure, and first I should thank you on behalf of alums for your volunteer work towards Syracuse University, which is near and dear to all of our hearts. So I will just do a shout out to you. We appreciate you. So, you know, when I think about the public good, what I think about are all the combinations of how we use our tools and how we use our assets, and those can be capital, those can be tools, those can be technologies, but how do we use them to ensure that everybody has an equal opportunity to have a place and has a way to navigate to the things they want to do to create a greater good? I do believe in my heart that everyone wants to leave the world a little bit better than they found it, but I don't think everybody has the same opportunities to try to figure out how to do that. And so when I look at generative AI, it's only one piece of the puzzle. And AI in general is just it's just more tools. And I think it does have the capacity to be a general purpose technology, really lift the opportunities, but it will never do what we really want it to do, because we have to do that. So I think where it can be helpful to public good is all the applications we've talked about. And where it can be harmful, we've talked a lot about some of the scary things that can be done with it. I'm going to tell a different story. I think where it can be harmful is if we sort ourselves into people who fear it and people who love it. Both are relatively blind to what it can, they're not interrogating what's possible. And we're likely to go, if we choose one of those two things, leave too much on the table that's not utilized, or accept too much that is harmful. So I see what's problematic for the public good, and I'm getting more and more encouraged as I see it really being interrogated, is that we can't sit in our rooms and hope it goes away, and we can't wildly adopt it without thinking about its consequences. The more we have conversations like this, the more firms have conversations about how do we use it, but how does it not harm our customers or clients, the more universities allow it in and teach its well-managed and ethical usage, then the better off we're going to be, because ultimately it's just a hammer. It's a really good hammer, but it's really just a tool. And we have to decide how to use it. So that's where I see it. We could always stay all night doing a listicle of where it could be frighteningly bad and where it could be amazingly good. But I'm going to end this where I started, which is we decide. This is a tool. We are the deciders.
Great. Mary, thank you so much. Now we're going to go to some audience questions. And Raj-Ann, I'm going to give you the first one because, not because you have said I'm an expert on this, but because you work with a lot of startups. This question is, there's a rush to develop fully autonomous AI. Shouldn't we be more concerned over the risk attached to this move?
No, I don't. I mean, yes, there's going to be risk in any kind of decision, but I don't think we want to, our adversaries, other people are going to be exploiting this technology. I don't think we want to, yes, the policies need to be articulated, the debates need to be had, but I don't think from a business standpoint that we need to be so constrained. Hopefully we will have a little bit more guardrails kind of articulated to us. So no, I wouldn't say we need to worry.
Okay. Jamie, this question is, thank you. This question is to you, the law professor. How can law students better use AI in conducting research? With Lexis and Westlaw, do you foresee issues with its accuracy or over-reliance on this tool?
Yes. Okay.
Next question.
No. So I believe that lawyers should use all the tools available to solve the problem and advance either the interest of the client or, in my case, the interest of the United States. And AI is such a tool. AI, that's not the tool, that's the concept, but the specific tool. But you have to do it wisely and well. And we've all heard the stories about the dopey lawyers who let the generative AI write the brief, and then they don't check all the fake cases that it generated. And that's not an AI problem, that's a dopey lawyer problem. That's a competence and diligence issue, which is a fundamental precept in the ethical code that lawyers are supposed to follow. If I came to you as your law clerk and I said, here's this great case that says we win, you're the partner, you're going to read the case. You're not going to just say, great, we win, I'll go ahead and let the client know. You read your work and you read the underlying work, and I caught on that economists do the same thing, or at least good ones, right? Now I lost, law students. So what I do with my students, I've done this, I've introduced two things into all my classes. So you can come to my class, and my class is the law of poetry and dogs. And that's not really the class, but if that were the class, they're still going to get my segment on disinformation, how to identify it and what to do about it, and they're still going to get my class on AI and the legal profession. And the first question I ask them is, what is AI better at? What are humans better at? And what are humans better at when augmented and teaming with AI? And you come up with these great lists, and guess what? There's a lot on the human side. And so then I say, well, knowing that, what are you going to do? What are you going to try and learn? And what part of the profession are you going to go into? Well, if you were the person who said, I want to spend my life in the basement of a law firm building doing document discovery, you're going to be out of a job because AI is really good at looking through documents and sorting them out. Really good at looking through documents, sorting them out, and kicking out those 7 that should be reviewed by a human. Just like you kick out what the AI said are the medical risks, and now you need to be seen by a specialist. These 9 people should take the specialist time, not all 5,000 people. So that's step 1. There's a lot of law professors who are just wishing it away. You were saying, like, we can't, I know AI. If you're in a professional school, you're supposed to already know how to read and write. And so I'm less concerned that someone's going to be at home using generative AI to write their paper. Plus, I can spot it. They're going to get caught out.
in the current version. But as the versions get better.
No, they're going to get caught out. But I don't mind if they use it for research, but they better verify that research.
Right. Mary, this question I think you're a good candidate for. How have you seen regulation, or the lack thereof, lead to the rise of what the person writes, quote, junk AI?
Well, I think that ultimately, and I'm going to agree with with Jamie and Raj-Ann, who said similar things, I do think that this is a technology that has just caught on. So it went from a craze, people were really crazy about it and interested in it and playing with it, to, I'd say in 2023, and now for the early part of this year, firms are realizing, okay, there's a lot of power here. We have to put up our own guardrails, Samsung being a great example. We have to put up our own guardrails. But increasingly, we do a lot of roundtables, talk to CEOs, small businesses, community groups, worker groups, et cetera. One of the things we hear, no matter who we talk to, is where's the regulatory framework? Where are the ring fences on this or that? Because ultimately, businesses want to work within a world that is safely prescribed, where they're not going to feel like, oh, I'm going to do this, and 5 years from now, all of that's going to be unraveled, or I might get in trouble. People want to know that they're providers of these models or have safety and soundness checks and other things. The Federal Reserve, just for everyone's clarity, I'm a monetary policymaker. I have no role in legislative affairs. That's our elected officials. So I'm not pontificating or talking about what we should do, but I definitely think that this is a missing piece to what is a fast-moving technology. And we often move slowly when we think about regulatory frameworks because we don't want to overburden innovation and experimentation. One of the things that's true about AI is in technology, these are called S-curves. It's the diffusion of a technology across the population, across the industries. The diffusion curve on this is extremely steep. This has been a very rapid adoption. The adoption rate is 7 times, I think someone told me, 7 times what we normally see for any released technology. So we're going to have to get focused on this, and I'm encouraged to hear some of the things, Jamie, you talked about already starting to happen. And I have not read the long executive order, but I'm definitely going to do that tonight. But in all seriousness, I think that I'm less worried about junk AI specifically than I am worried. I mean, it is something we should focus on, then I am worried about how are we going to collectively set up parameters that allow us to continue to experiment while we determine what is good and not good. And ultimately, it's going to come back to where it is on everything else we do. The best way to recognize what is right and what isn't is to learn yourself how to determine it. What is phishing, what is not phishing? What is a scam, what is not a scam? And our educational system, not only at the universities, but just public education, also has to catch up so we can start spotting. We have a campaign spotting the fish. We need to spot the AI junk, I think as the commentator called it, or the questioner called it, but I think we just really need to focus on that.
Great, thank you. So last question, any of you can answer it or you can decide not to answer it at all. You should not be worried that you're being surveilled in this question. All of you have social media presences. What are your thoughts on the future of AI and social media?
I think you said it earlier. We need to make sure, I mean, what do I think of as the future? I do think that social media is another example of technology, a tool that has a great capacity to do good, but runs the risk constantly of being not good. But we had problems with some of those things before we had generative AI. So for me, I think of it like I do everything else. Be careful what you look at, be careful what you read, and most importantly, be thoughtful about what you believe. And if I have that sensibility when I look at it, I'm assuming others will have that sensibility when they look at me.
Great.
I do not have a social media presence.
You want me to make you one tonight?
What?
I can make you one tonight.
No, it's fine.
I think now with the live stream you will.
Yeah. Right. I don't, I mean, for the simple reason that I don't want all my pictures and everything else. Now, it can all be hacked. I suspect OPM is provided it to China, but I'm trying to minimize the exposure and the risk.
Great.
And
Raj-Ann?
now tonight I'll get hammered.
I mean, obviously, there's a huge risk of, your images, your voice, if you're on TikTok and you're freely sharing, videos, that could be, warehoused who knows where. And so I think use social media very judiciously. It has a lot of positives in connecting people professionally and otherwise, but I think some people aren't really thinking through how much they're oversharing and where that's ending up, where that data's going.
Thank you very much. I want to share with you a happy story of social media and AI. One of our alums and Maxwell Advisory Board members, a guy named Ben Beldanza. Ben was an airline CEO. He's been a thought leader on how to lower costs and create greater access to travel for all individuals. Ben is suffering from ALS, but because Ben had been such a public figure and had done so many interviews, radio, TV, he'd written so much. He's a podcaster, something I think called Airline Confidential. But his ALS has debilitated him. His voice is down to a whisper. Physically, he's in very challenged shape. But his mind is so sharp. And I had the privilege of being with him last Friday, and one of the things that he's done is he's trained an AI to be able to be him. And so it's interesting. He serves on many boards, nonprofit boards, university boards, private company boards, and he had tried to resign from some, and it seemed almost uniformly that no one wanted him to resign. And their point was, you can show up virtually. You've now created both an avatar and an AI that can actually produce your voice because it had so much data to work with, that as long as you type your questions or type answers, we are now hearing it in your voice. And so I think, it really is one of the ways in which we think about technology being able to have some benefits. Before I offer my concluding remarks, let's thank our great panelists. Thank you to each of you.